Kiddushin daf MinDaf. How's everybody doing? Welcome to the MinDaf. So we're in the middle of a machlokes. The halacha is by get that if your father has a young daughter, a ketana, and she's married, not only does he receive a get for her, but she could also receive it. And we had a machlokes yesterday between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. What about Kiddushin? Rish Lakish says Kiddushin and Gerushin are the same, just like she receives the get, she receives the Kiddushin, v'yatsa v'haisa. Rabbi Yochanan says they're different. What if she's engaged? She received Kiddushin, her father received Kiddushin, and then her husband or chassan dies without children. So she becomes a yavama. She falls to yibum to the other brothers. Goes one of the brothers and wants to give her a ring. That's called maimer, because it only is effective midrabanan by yavama. For that, you need the consent of the father. But if she's a naira, she's already 12 years old, you don't need the consent of the father. Why not? Why is it different than Kiddushin? Because midoraisa, she's skuka. Skuka means there's a bond. She's attached to the yavam somewhat. The yavam is only finishing it off with this ring. So for that, you don't need the consent of the father. Even Rabbi Yehuda, who holds by a get, and he argues on Chachamim, like we said before, he argues on Chachamim that the girl cannot receive a get. Over here, he'll admit that the girl could receive the maimer because she's already skuka. Some say that according to Chachamim, a naira doesn't need the das of a father by maimer because we consider maimer something that could be done even forcefully bal karchach. Why? Because Rebbe holds that could be done forcefully. He compares maimer to the regular act of yibum. Just like yibum doesn't need the consent of the yavama, can be done bal karchach, so too the act of Kiddushin, although it's the Rabbanan, still can be done bal karchach. Chacham say, on the other hand, that no, the act of maimer is like a regular act of Kiddushin in a regular woman, and for that, a regular woman, you need her consent. So too maimer. The Gemara goes on to tell us that our Mishnah, even this part of the Mishnah, is Reb Shimon, based on the end of the Mishnah, which we're going to have on daf MinVav. You see, there's a machlokes, not on MinVav, but it's very similar to MinVav. I'm just going back to an original machlokes. If a person takes 5 collaterals from 5 different people, and he swears, now typically if he swore to one person, and he was found to be a liar, he has to bring a asham. Over here he swears to all 5, and he lies to them. Is it considered one shvuah or 5? So machlokes, according to Reb Shimon, in order for it to be considered 5 different shvuahs, he has to say the word shvuah lecha, shvuah lecha, shvuah lecha, etc. And according to Reb Elazar, as long as you say shvuah all the way at the end, according to Tanakama, if you say shvuah in the beginning. By us in our Mishnah, if a person tells a woman, I want to be mekadesh you with this fruit, and I want to be mekadesh you with this fruit, so they're not mitzaref. The value of the two of them are not mitzaref because he said a lashon kiddushin. So that will seem to be Reb Shimon, and therefore the beginning is also Reb Shimon. But the Gemara tells us Reb Shimon, however, also holds of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda, which we mentioned, holds that a girl, a ketana, cannot receive Kiddushin by herself. Only the father can receive the Kiddushin for her. Now, it says in our Mishnah, Ish mekadesh bitoy naira. So it's mashma from our Mishnah that only the ish, only the father can be mekadesh, and not the daughter. At the end of the day, the Gemara tells us the halach is like Rabbi Yochanan. How do we know this? Because Ravan came out of the Beis Medrash and he said, in Beis Medrash, everybody passing like Rabbi Yochanan, and Rish Lakish stood up there and he screamed like a crane. And he was screaming, V'yatsa v'haisa, you have to compare Kiddushin to Gerushin. And nobody cared. In other words, when it comes to Kiddushin, only the father receives the Kiddushin, not the daughter. The Gemara goes on to tell us that when it comes to a get, a nara, a girl who's 12 years old with simanim, is like the extension of the father's hand. She's not a chotzer, she's a yad. Why? Because if it's a chotzer, it only works if the person, the girl, would be sleeping, tied up, and you watch him like we have by a slave. And obviously the girl is not any of those, and therefore she can't accept it as a chotzer. Must be she's accepting the get as a yad. However, even though she's an extension of the father's hand, she cannot make another shliach, because a hand doesn't have the ability to make a shliach. You need das to make a shliach. We have a sugya that we're going to go into tomorrow's daf. A ketana, a minor that did not ask permission from her father to get engaged, she became kudeshes on her own. So the Gemara tells us she needs a get because perhaps the father agreed to this kiddushin, and she also needs something called miyun. She needs to refuse this kiddushin because maybe she didn't accept the kiddushin. So if she didn't accept the Kiddushin, why does she have to do miyun? Or, I'm sorry, the father didn't accept the Kiddushin. The answer is because this act of miyun shows that it's not a real Kiddushin. It's only the Rabbanan. And we want people to know that perhaps there's nothing going on here. And if this individual got engaged to her sister, people say, well, look, there was a get. It's deraisa. That engagement to the sister is nothing. Anybody could marry her. And in fact, no one can marry her because perhaps the first girl is not Mekudeshes and the second one is. We need to show that the first one might not be Mekudeshes, so she does miyun, and therefore people will be careful with the sister. And the Gemara tells us this whole halacha takes place by shidchu, when there was a shidduch. In other words, then we could say that the father agreed to it. They already spoke about it, it was discussed. According to Ulo, the Gemara says, a girl who gets engaged without her father's consent doesn't need a get and doesn't need miyun. It's a big fat zero. And either the pshat is we're talking about no shidduch, or some say even Ula is talking about even in a case of a shidduch. This is that we found that she got engaged herself, according to Ula, we must be talking about a yisoyme b'chayav. In other words, she was already married once. Then, because she was married, she leaves her father's domain completely. And the second time around, she got engaged herself. This that we find that a father sells his daughter who's an almana. How's that possible? Must be talking about that he sold her as an amma, and her master married her. So he had some sort of consent to the marriage, but it's not really as if he married her off, he never received anything, and therefore he's able halachically to sell her after she was already married. Rabbi Isai, have a wonderful day.